Earth is a planet of paradoxes and mysteries. We build cities, cross oceans, and launch satellites beyond the atmosphere. Yet, our planet still holds secrets that challenge our understanding of the world. Let's set out on a grand journey to explore the global natural phenomena on the planet. We'll uncover their mysteries and discover why they captivate our imagination. We'll dive into the ocean depths to witness a lost continent that remained hidden for millennia. We'll venture to the hottest place on Earth, where shoes melt and devices break down. Then we'll enter forests so teeming with life that new species are still being discovered, along with traces of ancient civilizations. And finally, we'll explore a massive rift in the Earth's crust, holding billions of years of history, the greatest book of time on our planet. These are stories about a world we are still trying to understand. Global natural phenomena of Earth. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. YouTube algorithms will understand what you like and will offer you even more interesting and educational content. In 2016, the media and social networks were buzzing with news that excited and amused the public. On May 24th of the same year, a traveler and blogger, Chloe Phillips Harris, flew CZ6011 from Urumqi to Almaty in the Republic of Kazakhstan. At the border, she was denied entry into the country because she presented a passport of a non-existent state. The state, according to the border guards, was New Zealand. This is the version told by Chloe. Not everyone on social networks was on her side, noting that it's just fantasy for hype. The official response of the authorities of Kazakhstan was also quite predictable. The girl did not have a visa. It doesn't matter who was right, because in less than a year, the academic world was shaken by the discovery, which can make us rewrite geography textbooks. And border services around the world may have to prepare themselves for the arrival of tourists not just from a previously unknown country, but from a continent unknown before. For better or worse, we're not talking about Atlanteans or some new people in general, but about a new continent. Skeptics would say, well, sure, now you're going to tell that, let's say, Greenland will be recognized as a continent on paper, and that's the whole intrigue. No, it's not that simple, and it's much, much more interesting. Today, you're going to find out where a real, not mythical, sunken continent has been found. What can we find there? Why is Greenland an island and Australia a continent? What do the kiwi bird and the elephant bird have in common? A hidden continent that has been searched for 400 years and found. How many continents are there on our planet? If you ask this question to Google in different languages, you will see that there is no clear answer. You probably learned and remembered in your childhood that there are 7 continents. But this is just you, and some people know that there are 6 of them, or 5, or even 4. So who's right? The answer is everyone. These are simply different models of understanding the issue. It all depends on where and when one grew up, what culture one was raised in, and what educational program one studied. Yes, this may come as a surprise to many of our viewers around the world, but the number of continents remains a subject of discussion. In some systems, Europe and Asia are considered a single entity, Eurasia. In others, North and South America are a single continent, the Americas. Some do not consider Antarctica a continent, claiming that it is only an island, a kind of super Greenland, and so on. So the number of continents is a matter of interpretations, construals, and conventions rather than a unified definition. Currently, the most universally recognized version is that there are 7 continents: North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Antarctica, Australia. and that with reservations primarily regarding Europe and Asia. But let it be 7, because we need something to base on. So, according to all criteria, it appears that the lucky number 7 is the maximum. Until recently, nobody thought there could be an 8th continent. Yes, until recently. But in the mid-1990s, geologists began to suspect something. First, there were timid attempts to confirm the suspicions. Then, other prominent scientists got involved. And now, in the recent few years, the scientific world has been literally flooded with the overwhelming truth. And don't think it's about recognizing a long-known Greenland as a continent. No, it's much more interesting than that. And before we unveil all these amazing things to you, we need to explain something to complete the idea of ambiguities in the definitions of what a continent is. Up until the 1960s, the definition of a continent was simple, roughly as a large area of land comprising many countries connected together without being separated by water. Things got more complicated in the 1960s when scientists studying the ocean bottoms found that the crust beneath the oceans was fundamentally different from the crust on the mainland areas. 2 types of crust were identified: oceanic and continental. The oceanic crust is dominated by basalt, while the continental crust is dominated by granite. These are the most common rock types on Earth, and both are igneous, meaning they originate as hot liquids. As they cool, they crystallize and form rock. The thing is that granite is less dense than basalt, and while still in liquid form, it actually floats on the denser and heavier basaltic bulk. This explains why the oceanic crust lies noticeably lower in relation to the Earth's surface, and why the continental crust rises much higher. It's a matter of buoyancy. The average height of oceanic crust is 4,500 meters, about 14,800 feet below sea level, while continental crust rises 450 meters, about 1,500 feet above sea level. So that's how simple it turns out to be. The reason scientists didn't realize this until the 1960s is also simple. The oceanic crust lies at great depths, and we simply weren't able to get to it until the appropriate technical means were developed. That's how the first ironclad argument for defining a continent, continental crust, appeared. Scientists breathed a sigh of relief, but just for a while, because crust is not the only criterion. What about the size of the land? Like, really, why is Greenland an island and Australia a continent? What's the minimum area for a piece of land to be considered a continent? And most importantly, on what grounds? The arguments continue to this day. There is still no generally accepted requirement for the minimum size of continents. There are even definitions that suggest that even a piece of land of 1 million square kilometers, about 400,000 square miles, can be considered a continent. But this is half the size of Greenland, which, as we know, is an island. No other way. Therefore, most scientists still tend to more weighted definitions, which offer a benchmark of 3 million square kilometers, about 1.16 million square miles as a threshold for land to be considered a continent. This is how the second argument arose. Though controversial, it's still better than just a large area of land. What next? Definitions from different angles were formed. The narrowest meaning of the word continent is a continuous piece of land with its coastline and any land boundaries forming its edge. In this sense, the term mainland Europe, the British often say simply continent, is used to refer specifically to mainland Europe, excluding islands such as Great Britain, Iceland, Ireland, Malta, and others. By the same logic, the term continent Australia refers to mainland Australia, excluding New Guinea, Tasmania, and other nearby islands. But from a geological point of view, the boundaries of the continent can be extended beyond the continuous mainland. and can include the shallow submerged adjacent territory, which is called the continental shelf. This also includes islands on the shelf, which will be called continental islands in this case, since structurally they are a part of the continent. From this point of view, the edge of the continental shelf is the true edge of the continent, because the coastlines change depending on changes in sea level. Indeed, let's imagine a high tide on a flat shore that causes the water to move a dozen or so meters inland. That piece of land hasn't stopped being part of a continent, has it? In this sense, the islands of Great Britain and Ireland are part of the continent of Europe, while Australia and the island of New Guinea together form a continent. Some specialists go further, assuming that the concept of a continent can go beyond the continental shelf to include oceanic islands and continental fragments. Thus, Iceland is considered part of Europe, and Madagascar part of Africa. And finally, the scientific extreme. Some geographers classify the continental part of Australia with other islands in the Pacific Ocean as Oceania, which is usually considered a region, not a continent. Okay, there's one last thing. Suppose two large pieces of land are located very close to each other in the world ocean. Both fulfill the two criteria mentioned above. They both consist of continental crust, and each is larger than 3 million square kilometers, about 1.16 million square miles. How can we tell if they are two different continents or if they are one continent just divided by a patch of ocean? The answer came pretty quickly. To consider these two pieces of land to be different continents, they must be separated for the most part by oceanic crust, not continental crust. And that was the third argument in determining what is a continent and what is not. So again, here are the three main criteria science uses to determine what is a continent, not an island or continental fragment. It consists of continental crust. It's a large landmass of at least 3 million square kilometers, about 1.16 million square miles. And it is separated from other continents by a patch of oceanic crust. We would like to particularly emphasize the third argument. It will play the crucial and final role in the discovery our video is devoted to. You'll find out soon. This long introduction was necessary to fully understand the discovery we have finally reached. It took navigators and scientists as long as 375 years to make this discovery. And it all feels like an epic detective story. Let's see what this is all about. There is a reason why we started our story with a curious case of a tourist from New Zealand. Hundreds of years ago, these lands excited the minds of explorers. Europeans had an unshakable belief that there must be a large landmass in the south, which was even given a provisional name, Terra Australis. This belief was based on the erroneous and naive idea that a large amount of land in the northern hemisphere should be kind of balanced by no smaller amount in the southern hemisphere, or otherwise the Earth would turn over. By this time, Australia was already known, but Europeans believed that it was not the legendary continent they were looking for, and there must be another. They tried hard to find it, sending expeditions in that direction. One such pioneer was an experienced Dutch navigator, Abel Tasman. On August 14, 1642, he sailed from Jakarta, Indonesia, in 2 small ships, and pretty quickly discovered the South Island of New Zealand. 250 years passed. Scottish New Zealand geologist and naturalist Sir James Hector surveyed a number of islands off the coast of New Zealand in 1895. He concluded that New Zealand is surrounded by a vast continental shelf with depths ranging from 1,000 to 2,000 meters, about 3,000 to 6,000 feet, much shallower than the ocean floor depths of 4,000 to 5,000 meters, about 13,000 to 16,000 feet. That same year, he reported his findings in a scientific paper where he said that New Zealand was the remnant of a mountain chain that formed the crest of a great continental area that stretched far to the south and east, and which is now submerged. And finally, in 1995, American geophysicist Bruce P. Lyondike, showing great scientific courage, decided to call things by their names. In his opinion, the entire underwater area around New Zealand, which is structurally a continental crust, should be considered a full-fledged continent. And that's that. He even gave this continent a name, Zealandia. The idea struck a chord among New Zealand geologists and the public. Perhaps the hype would have faded, and the idea of an eighth continent would have vanished. Who cares about some spaces underwater? But the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which came into force, changed everything. The document states that countries can extend their legal territories beyond the exclusive economic zone. This zone extends 200 nautical miles, 370 kilometers from the coastline, so a country can claim rights to an extended continental shelf with all the minerals and oil it includes. If New Zealand could prove that it was part of a larger continent, it could increase its legal territory sixfold. Needless to say, there was instant money, energy, and motivation for scientific pursuit in this direction, in abundance. Different groups of scientists from New Zealand worked on the issue. Expeditions were sent to survey the area and take samples. With each rock sample collected, the case for Zealandia grew stronger. Then, a satellite constellation was added to the study, and it was a breakthrough. Using data from orbit, it became possible to map the ocean floor based on the slightest changes in gravity in different parts of the Earth's crust in the vicinity of New Zealand. Thanks to this technology, Zealandia became clearly visible, and it was finally clear that even though it was smaller than Australia, it was still huge. The New Zealand research organization GNS Science has produced 15 detailed maps presenting the continent in different contexts and from a variety of perspectives. Moreover, they show in dynamics how Zealandia separated from the supercontinent Gondwana and how it was transformed over many millions of years. The authors call the continent not even Zealandia, but Te Reo a Maui, which is how its name sounds in the language of the indigenous Maori people. A few more years later, the collaborative work of many researchers revealed even more surprising details about how the continent formed, what it was, and why it sank. For many millions of years, the planet's land surface was divided between two large supercontinents, Gondwana and Laurasia, huge fragments of the broken-up supercontinent of Pangaea. This is what Gondwana looked like. What would later become Zealandia took up a corner on the eastern side of Gondwana, where it bordered several other continents, including half of West Antarctica and the entire eastern side of Australia. It was a fairly large area, making up about 5% of the total area of Gondwana. Then, the supercontinent began to break up. Fragments of what would become present-day South America, Africa, India, Australia, and Antarctica began to separate from it. Zealandia too separated and set off on its voyage on the Earth's mantle. As these continents spread apart, some of them, such as South America and Africa, were pressed together for a long time, so they didn't change shape too much. You see, the eastern outline of South America is exactly the same as the western outline of Africa. It's like pieces of a complex jigsaw puzzle. With Zealandia, something different happened. Its shape changed quite a lot, but it wasn't the change in shape that affected the continent's dramatic fate. It was the change in thickness. Continental crust is usually about 40 kilometers, 25 miles thick, much thicker than oceanic crust, which is usually about 10 kilometers or 6 miles thick. In the process of drifting, Zealandia didn't just move, it stretched, literally like a rubber band. What happens to a rubber band when you stretch it? It gets longer in width, but it gets thinner. That's exactly what happened to Zealandia. It literally stretched wide, losing half its thickness. Now the thickness on the continental crust of Zealandia is about 20 kilometers, 12.4 miles. Most likely, the continent did not submerge underwater as if a sinking ship from top to bottom. Instead, it thinned so much that eventually, its surface was almost below the level of the world's ocean. Only the islands of New Zealand, New Caledonia, and other smaller islands remained above. And now it's time to return to the question of definitions. Remember, we mentioned 3 main criteria that scientists have laboriously agreed upon to clearly define what a continent is and what is not. And there was an intrigue and almost a drama at this point. The first criterion is that the continent must consist of continental crust. The test was passed with an excellent mark here. No one has any doubts. This was determined by Sir James Hector more than 100 years ago, and subsequent studies have just confirmed his conclusions. The second criteria is an area greater than 3 million square kilometers, about 1.16 million square miles. There's no doubt about that either. Zealandia has been measured up and down. The area of the continental crust is 4.9 million square kilometers, 1.9 million square miles. The area of the continental crust is 4,900,000 square kilometers, 1,900,000 square miles. The third criterion is that it must be separated from the other continents by oceanic crust. And this is where the real intrigue was. Indeed, Zealandia is very close to Australia. If there was no oceanic crust between them, it would appear that Zealandia is simply a continuation of Australia and should be called merely a continental fragment, but not a continent. However, Zealandia's continental status was rather quickly saved. It turned out that between it and Australia, there is a very narrow yet quite obvious layer of oceanic crust. It's only about 25 kilometers, 15 miles wide, almost nothing on the scale of entire continents. It was formed by volcanic activity, and that made it clear that Zealandia should be considered separately from Australia. Virtually no one was left in doubt anymore. New Zealand's 268,021 square kilometers, 103,483 square mile islands are just the tip. And in fact, in addition to New Zealand, there is also, so to say, Old Zealand, with an area of almost 5 million square kilometers, 1.9 million square miles, almost 20 times bigger. Although the geology of Zealandia is already clear, there are still many things unknown. The unusual origin of the 8th continent makes it particularly intriguing to geologists, and in some cases, even confusing. For example, it is still unclear how Zealandia has managed to maintain integrity while being so thin and not breaking up into microcontinents and islands. Another mystery is when exactly Zealandia became underwater, and whether it ever actually was a landmass. After all, it cannot be ruled out that it was originally mostly underwater. There is still debate and research going on. More and more evidence suggests that these vast areas were once dry land indeed, and certainly teeming with life. Then the question arises, if we explore these flooded areas, what can we find there? Perhaps remnants of ancient forests with previously unknown huge trees, or even fossils of ancient animals, the existence of which the scientific world has never known before. Logic suggests that this could be the case, and not just logic. With its mild climate and 101 million square kilometers, 39 million square miles, the ancient supercontinent Gondwana was home to a huge variety of flora and fauna, including the first four-legged terrestrial animals. And later, it was also home to the largest animals that ever lived, Titanosaurus. So could Zealandia's underwater cliffs be dotted with their preserved remains? Or someone else's? There are not only speculations, but also quite material evidence that supports this hypothesis. Fossils of terrestrial animals are quite rare in the southern hemisphere, but still, the remains of a few were found in New Zealand back in the 1990s. For example, the ribs of a giant species of sauropods, a long-tailed dinosaur with a long neck. Also, fragments of fossils of a small herbivorous Hypsilophodon, and even an armored and spiky Ankylosaurus. Then, in 2006, a foot bone of a large predator, possibly a species of Allosaurus, was discovered in the Chatham Islands, about 800 kilometers, 500 miles east of South Island. It should be noted that all the fossils date from the time when the continent of Zealandia had already separated from Gondwana. New Zealand's kiwi, one of the strangest birds on the planet, adds spice to the story. This flightless creature with cat-like whiskers and thin feathers that looks more like fur has always attracted attention. It is difficult to determine right away its closest relative. Your first thought most probably would be the extinct moa bird. It does look somewhat similar to the kiwi, except that these small birds were over 3 meters, 10 feet in size, and weighed hundreds of kilograms. And it lived over 500 years ago on the same islands. It would seem that everything fits together. But in fact, it's even more interesting, and molecular genetics helped solve the mystery. The closest ancestor of the modern kiwi bird is actually the extinct elephant bird. It was also a 3-meter giant that laid eggs as big as those of the dinosaurs. The only difference is that the elephant bird didn't live here, to put it mildly. Its habitat was in the forests of Madagascar. It died out about 800 years ago. This is further proof of New Zealand's origin from the supercontinent Gondwana, and not due to volcanic activity or any other cause. However, scientists and all curious people are most interested in what rests on the submerged territories under the layers of sediments accumulated over millions of years. And there are still some difficulties with this because the depth is quite significant. Although it is still virtually impossible to collect fossils directly from Zealandia's seabed, scientists have explored its depths by drilling. The method is not as spectacular in terms of possible finds, but it is quite effective in proving the nature of life that existed millions of years ago in this area. Actually, the most helpful and distinctive fossils are the ones which form in the very shallow seas, says Rupert Sutherland, a professor of geophysics and tectonics at the Victoria University of Wellington, because they leave a record. There are zillions and zillions of tiny little fossils that are very distinctive. In 2017, the team of scientists conducted the most extensive survey of the region to date and drilled more than 1,250 meters, 4,101 feet of seafloor in 6 different locations. The cores they collected contained pollen from land plants, as well as spores and shells from organisms that lived in warm, shallow seas. If you have water which is only, 10 meters, 33 feet deep or something like this, then there's a good chance that there was land around as well, says Sutherland, explaining that the pollen and spores also suggest the possibility that Zealandia wasn't quite as submerged as it was thought. Another long-time mystery lies in the shape of Zealandia. If you look at a geological map of New Zealand, there are 2 things that really stand out, says Sutherland. For example, the Alpine Fault, a plate boundary that runs along the South Island and is so impressive in size that it can be seen from space. The second strange thing is that the geology of New Zealand, like that of the entire continent, is oddly curved. The 2 continents are split in 2 by a horizontal line where the Pacific and Australian tectonic plates converge. At this point, it is as if someone has taken the lower half and twisted it so that the previously continuous belts of rock not only do not line up anymore, but lie almost at a right angle. The simple explanation for this is that the tectonic plates shifted and somehow changed their shape. But how exactly and when this happened is still not fully clear. Sutherland explains that the continent will hardly reveal all of its secrets anytime soon. It's quite hard to make discoveries when everything is 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles underwater, and the layers that you need to sample are 500 meters, 1,640 feet beneath the seabed as well, he explains. It's really challenging to go out and explore a continent like that, so it just takes a lot of time, money, and effort to go out and ships and survey regions. We do not know whether international organizations and the authorities of some countries have the determination to include the 8th continent in geography textbooks. But that does not change the main point. The 8th continent is a fact. More than anything else, it shows that almost 400 years after Tasman's search, we still have much to discover. Who knows what explorers will find when they reach the depths that were once the surface? Unfortunately, it's certainly not the ruins of an ancient civilization. Though, to put it in the words of the legendary poster, I want to believe. However, astonishing discoveries await not only at the bottom of the ocean, but right here on the surface of the Earth. Imagine a place where the heat makes the soles of your shoes fall off, your electronics fail, and you can cook food in a pot without a fire. You think we're talking about Venus? Or a volcano mouth? No. This is our planet, and volcanoes are far away. But here, even a piece of meat exposed to the sun will be cooked in a couple of hours, as if it had been in the oven. Well, why as if? Those who have been to this place and managed to get out of it describe it exactly this way. But even this hell used to be home to an amazing civilization that once thrived. But now there are only odd ruins left from it. The highest temperatures on the planet's surface have been recorded here by NASA satellites. It is said that not even bacteria can survive here now. Well, let's check it out. Today, we're going on a trip to the Lut Desert in Iran. How come the hottest desert is neither the Sahara nor the Death Valley? What kind of ancient civilization lived here? And where did it go? And why does it seem to have been ruled by a matriarchy? Eventually, we'll take a virtual walk to the hottest spot in the desert and find out what happens to humans and equipment in such infernal heat. And we'll find out if there really aren't even any bacteria here. The Lut Desert, the hottest place on Earth. From the Persian, the name of the desert, Dasht-e Lut, can be translated as emptiness, waterless place. And these words fully describe what a madman who dares to visit this remote and lifeless land will see before him. Despite the infernal heat and extreme drought, bizarre landscapes fascinate and attract tourists to this mysterious corner. It is a very picturesque area, covering several depressions separated by highlands and whimsical formations of volcanic origin. The desert covers an area of about 52,000 square kilometers in the east of the country. It extends about 500 kilometers in length and ranges from 100 to 320 kilometers in width. Over the past 2 decades, 2 Earth observation satellites have measured infrared radiation emitted by the planet's surface at different locations. The goal was to determine their temperatures on such a large scale. NASA's MODIS, Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectroradiometers, were used for this purpose. MODIS data regularly demonstrated that summer temperatures in the arid regions rose above 60 degrees Celsius. Finally, in 2005, a record temperature of 70.7 degrees Celsius was registered in the Dasht-e Lut Desert. However, it later turned out that this was not the ceiling. Backed by software improvements, researchers from the University of California, Irvine have conducted a new analysis of global surface temperatures in 2018. High-resolution satellite data reported that temperatures once reached as much as 80.8 degrees Celsius in Dasht-e Lut, but the temperature in the desert is by no means uniform. In this hellish area, there is an absolutely infernal place where even a short stay is dangerous for health and even life. The hottest place in the desert is considered to be the Gondom-Berrien Plateau. Its name translates as roasted wheat. A legend states that a caravan had to leave its cargo, wheat, here for a while back in ancient times. This was because even the camels could not endure the infernal heat, and it was decided to move to a less dangerous place with little cargo. After some time, when the camels recovered a little, the men returned to the plateau, but they found the wheat burnt to a crisp. At the end of our journey, we will go to this eerie place, and you will see it with your own eyes in all its deadly majesty. Watch the video to the end. How the desert was formed. But first, let's find out how such an area, which does not resemble anything else, as if it was moved from another planet, was formed on Earth. Not only was the Lut Desert not always a desert, but it used to be the very reverse to what it is today. Once again, the very reverse. We're not even talking about lush forests. Scientists believe that millions of years ago, instead of sun-scorched land, there was an inland sea splashing here, which presumably was a continuation of the Arabian Sea. After the collision of the ancient continents of Laurasia and Gondwana, the terrain changed irreversibly. Kubonan, Central Iranian Range, and Zagros mountain ranges, located parallel to the Persian Gulf, emerged in the territory of modern Iran. From the seabed, huge drainless basins were formed, which turned into the Dasht-e Lut and Dasht-e Kavir deserts. Under the influence of scorching beams, the water evaporated or was absorbed into the ground. What remained of the ancient sea were a few salty lakes and kavirs, saline plains. Now the Lut Desert consists of lowlands alternating with mountain ranges and unusual volcanic formations with a height up to 2 kilometers. Its surface is covered with clay, pebbles, sand, and rubble. There are also many salt marshes, representing soils with easily soluble salts. In the southern part of the Lut Desert, adjacent to the foot of the Kubonan Range, there is a picturesque saline depression called Nemexar. In many parts, the area is covered with yardangs, narrow grooves and sharp ridges separating them. The height of the yardangs in the Dasht-e Lut Desert reaches 80 meters. They are a real landmark of the desert. From afar, they look like sand-covered ruins of a giant alien city. The local yardangs are considered to be the largest on Earth. The southeast of the region is dominated by sands. Beautiful barshans and dunes stretch all the way to the horizon. From time to time, severe dust storms occur here. The variety of landscapes in this part of the desert is impressive. There are sandhills up to 300 meters high, which are also world champions in their category. So, we have sorted out how the desert appeared, but the remaining question is, why is it so terribly hot here? Why is it so hot here? The point is that the Dasht-e Lut Desert is surrounded by mountains from all sides. Because of them, humid air from the Mediterranean and Arabian seas simply does not reach it. As a result, the so-called heat pole is formed. The humidity level in the desert is very low. It ranges from 20 to 40%, so the region competes for the rank of the most arid area with the Atacama Desert in Chile. It usually receives less than 30 millimeters of rainfall per year. That's virtually nothing. Under such conditions, of course, it's hard to expect life to thrive here. In fact, nature feels more or less fine here in the oases only. What about nature? There are only a few of them, and they are located on the outskirts of the desert, at the foot of the mountains. There is even a river originating in these areas. It springs from the northern mountains of Birjand. Sometimes it even tries to reach the central part of the desert, but gets quickly lost in the salt marshes. The water is very salty, so vegetation is very sparse, even in the oases. Occasionally, you can find a tamarisk. These are trees or shrubs that can grow up to 10 meters. Other species that can be found are wormwood and desert lichen. The fauna of the Lut Desert is also very poor. Small nocturnal rodents live in the places that are not so arid. These are mainly gophers and jerboas, which often inhabit desert areas. There is little detailed information about the animals in these areas. This region is still very understudied. There are, of course, no birds here at all. Only rare migratory birds, unluckily flying over this area, cannot find shade for shelter and pay with their lives for this mistake. They try to drink the water from the salt lakes, which is unsuitable for them, and die from that too. Yes, this place has mercy on no one. But in September 2020, an entirely new species of crustacean was discovered in the desert. The shrimp Phallocryptis fahimi was found in a small lake that occasionally emerges in the southern part of the desert. According to Dr. Hossein Rajai, these animals can survive for decades in dried sediment and come out of their natural anabiosis before the rainy season. Ancient cities. Even small animals struggle to survive in these places, say nothing of humans. That's why the fact that people lived here many thousands of years ago is particularly astonishing. And it was not just some small tribes, but a whole civilization, the details about which we are only now beginning to discover. And these details are striking. Shar-e-Sukta. Now we will travel to an amazing place, which is located not in the Lut Desert itself, but almost on its outskirts. In 1967, in the east of Iran, in the province of Sistan and Baluchistan on the bank of the Helmand River, the remains of the ancient city Shar-e-Sukta were found. In the Persian language, it means burnt city. And this is not a metaphor, but a reflection of the deep tragedy of the city, and possibly a whole civilization. Soon, you will find out what happened there. The city was founded around 3200 BC. It occupies an area of more than 150 hectares. That's a lot. This size makes Shar-e-Sukta one of the largest cities at the dawn of human civilization. Due to the complicated political situation, no excavations were conducted for a long time. This unique settlement began to be studied on a permanent basis only in the 21st century. And there is certainly a lot to study here, because this place once bombarded the amazed scientists with an incredible waterfall of amazing finds and multiple mysteries. The thing is that despite the abundance of finds, they give more questions than answers. Judging by them, for example, by the painted pottery, the civilization of the burnt city was not similar to any of those that existed at that time. Neither the Elam civilization, found in western Iran of that era, nor the Harappan civilization from the Indus Valley. Let us see what amazing things were discovered in this mysterious ancient city. One of the most famous finds in the territory of Shar-e-Sukta is the first known prosthetic eyeball. It is made from natural bitumen, a substance that is hard but ductile when heated, formed in nature under certain conditions from petroleum. People began using bitumen in the Stone Age to make utensils and to bind various elements together. A thin layer of gold covers the surface of the bitumen ball, and the iris with gold rays diverging from it is engraved in the center. The prosthesis was attached to the eye socket with a thin gold wire. The study of the skeleton revealed that the artificial eye belonged to a woman who lived around 2900 BC and was used during her lifetime. She was very tall for those times, 182 centimeters, and had a dark complexion. She was presumably from Arabia. She died relatively young, at the age of 25 to 30 years. By the way, it appears that women played an important role in the life of the city, perhaps even ruled it. At least, they noticeably surpassed men in both number and life expectancy. A lot of carved jewelry made from river pebbles used as personal seals or simply demonstrating the high status of their owners were found in women's graves. We can assume that this is quite a natural demographic bias for those harsh times. After all, men probably perished en masse in wars. Yes, that makes sense. But there is one catch. Archaeologists found no weapons at Shari Sukta, and not even a slight hint that there were any warriors and warlords in it at all. This is, to put it mildly, very strange, because it's impossible that such a metropolis could have no enemies in those times. Or was it lucky to exist in some peaceful era? No, because the very history of the city suggests very tragic periods. And we're talking about more than 1,000 years of the city's existence. The history of Shari Sukta is divided into 4 stages, the succession of which is characterized by a sharp increase in its area. For 11 centuries, the territory occupied by the city increased by 1.5 orders of magnitude, from 10 to 150 hectares. During this period, monumental buildings, dwelling areas, artisan workshops, and a huge cemetery were erected in the city. It would seem that the city was continuously growing and developing. Unfortunately, it wasn't. The city was completely destroyed by fire 3 times, and it was rebuilt 3 times. The reason for the complete and repeated destruction of the metropolis is still unclear. One thing is certain. The inhabitants had the same respect for death as many other civilizations. Modern scientists possess an inexhaustible treasure trove of information on this subject. The settlement was extremely densely populated. This is evident not only from the area it occupied, but also from a cemetery with at least 40,000 graves found by archaeologists in one of its parts. This is an incredible scale for those times. From the outside, it looks like the footage of a sci-fi movie about an alien civilization on a desert planet. It is so different, not only from modern days, but also from any neighboring civilization of those times. Today, Iranian archaeologists estimate that only 4 to 5% of the area of Shara Sukta has been excavated. We still know depressingly little about the amazing civilization that founded the city. Some researchers suggest that it belonged to the Zhiroft culture. That's the early Bronze Age, 3 to 1 millennia BC. But the city is quite different from the main historical site of the latter, Konar Sandal, a city on 2 hills. Others single out Shari Sukta into a separate Helmand culture, which includes Mundijak, located in Afghanistan. It is about 3,200 to 2,350 years BC. In general, scientists have received a lot of evidence of the existence of a completely distinctive and developed civilization between Mesopotamia and the Elam civilization in the west and the Indus civilization in the east, a civilization of which the scientific world was not aware at all until recent years. The reasons for the rise and decay of Shari Sukta have not yet been clarified. A particularly remarkable fact is the independence of the city's development from neighboring cities of that time. This makes it difficult to answer the question about the origin of this civilization and its predecessors. Judging by the findings, the city was eventually abandoned around 1800 BC. Who the inhabitants of the city were, where they came from and where they went, what language they spoke, and how they named their city, all these questions are unanswered. Shaddad. Now let's move to the opposite side of the Lut Desert and visit another ancient city, Shaddad. According to Iranian scientists, in ancient times, the Lut Desert served as a strong link between East and West. It was not so deadly hot at that time. Perhaps Shari Sukta and Shaddad were even certain poles of this civilizational link. The city of Shaddad is not only an archaeological site, people still live here despite the absolutely hellish conditions. After all, the city lies directly adjacent to the desert. This settlement appeared in the 5th millennium BC. By the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC, Shaddad began to grow rapidly as international trade with Mesopotamia expanded. Excavations of tombs have revealed impressive artifacts among the stone blocks once painted in bright colors. These include several unusual, almost life-size clay statues placed in the burial chamber with the dead. The city's craftsmen worked with lapis lazuli, silver, lead, turquoise, and other materials imported from neighboring, albeit quite distant, Afghanistan, as well as with shells from the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. Evidence shows that there was a large metalworking industry in the ancient Shaddad at that time. During a recent survey, a new generation of archaeologists discovered a huge hill, nearly 90 meters by 90 meters, covered with slag from melting copper. Analysis of the waste materials revealed that craftsmen were smart enough to add a small amount of arsenic at later stages of the manufacturing process to strengthen the final product. The blacksmiths of Shaddad sometimes created real masterpieces of art. The most vivid evidence of this is a metal flag dating back to about 2400 BC. It was mounted on a copper pole topped with the figure of a bird, possibly an eagle. The rectangular flag depicts two figures facing each other on a motley background made up of images of animals, plants, and deities. It has not yet been found out what this flag was used for. It is difficult to connect it with anything from the life of the ancient city. Scientists have also found amazing artifacts, hinting that the locals used a kind of perfume. In the spring of 2009, a small stone container was found here. The vessel turned out to be very ancient. It dated back to the end of the 4th millennium BC. It is made of chlorite, a dark, soft mica-like mineral, which was often used by ancient craftsmen in southeastern Iran. The find was subjected to a very careful analysis in an Iranian laboratory. Even such high-tech means and techniques as X-ray diffraction were used. This is how lead carbonate, used as a white cosmetic product, was found sealed in the bottom of the jar. Further examination revealed the remains of a fatty material, possibly oil. It had probably been added as a binder. Finally, traces of coumarin, an aromatic chemical compound found in plants and used in perfumes, were found. Now the work of exploring the remains of antiquities in Shaddad continues. Over the past few years, Iranian archaeologists Hassan Fazeli Nashli and Hossein Ali Kavosh of Tehran University have been excavating a small settlement a few miles east of Shaddad. Its name is not Persian at all, Tapa Graziani. It was named after the Italian archaeologist who first examined the site. Scientists are trying to grasp the role of the city's outer settlements by examining a highly remarkable ancient mound. It is 9 meters high, 160 meters wide, and 219 meters long. Archaeologists have uncovered many artifacts, including small sculptures depicting rough human figures, humped bulls, and a two-humped camel. The finds date back to around 2900 BC. Metal finds include a bronze mirror, fishing hooks, daggers, and pins. There are also wooden combs that have survived in the arid climate. The site is very small, but very abundant, says Hassan Fazeli, adding that it may have been a thriving suburban manufacturing center of Shaddad. Journey. So, we have visited the most interesting places in the vicinity of the Lut Desert, and now we will do what we promised at the very beginning of the video, a journey to the desert itself. and even to its hottest place, the Gandambarian Plateau. You will learn, what does a person feel when approaching this hellish place? What happens to appliances and electronics? Will a piece of meat get fried if left in the sun? Or is that a myth? What dangers might be waiting in the most unexpected places? Finally, we'll find out if this place really can't even be home to bacteria, as some people claim. And it is in Shaddad that we begin our journey. It is the last inhabited settlement before the Lut Desert. It must be said that this place is so dangerous that visiting it during the hottest summer months is explicitly forbidden by the Iranian authorities, unless you have a special permit. You can put out of your mind the idea of getting to the Gandambarian Plateau on foot. You can cover most of the way by car, and only with a guide who will dare to do such a courageous act. Even at the very beginning of the journey, outside the city of Shaddad, the temperature of the ground surface exceeds 60 degrees. The air temperature in the shadows reaches 45 degrees, and that's while the instruments are still showing something, because it's only going to get worse from here. If you want to stay in the open air for more than 2 minutes, no part of your body should be uncovered, including even your hands. It will take you about 2 hours by car to get to the hottest part of the desert, and that's only to its outskirts, because the guide simply won't go further. The equipment can't withstand such temperatures either. Even car tires have to be significantly deflated so that they do not burst. But this does not always help, because there are often sharp stones in the sand. Those rare daredevils who made it to the center had to walk the rest of the way by foot, and it was a real torture for everyone. Electronics start to fail pretty quickly along the way. Household laser thermometers malfunction. Smartphones shut down due to overheating. If you don't notify special services of your trip in advance, you're very likely to be unable to call for help and will probably die. More advanced instruments capable of working in such conditions show surface temperatures close to the very 70 degrees that NASA satellites have recorded. It becomes difficult to breathe, almost impossible to swallow. Your mouth dries up after just a couple of breaths. You have to drink small portions of water almost non-stop. And it's good if you've correctly calculated the amount of water you'll need on this crazy journey. The wind rises, and as you can easily guess, it does not give the usual coolness, but burns the skin instead. You can only rely on your luck to avoid a sandstorm, which would mean certain death. However, local winds create strong wind erosion and turn local rocks into real works of art. But you can't admire them for long if you want to reach the Gandambarian Plateau and return alive. Along the way, you'll quickly feel that there's something wrong with your shoes. Hardly any shoes can withstand such temperatures. Many daredevils have had their soles quickly melt and stick off. Even if you manage to pick up the shoes that won't fall apart, you'll still feel the heat of the surface even through the thick soles. Standing in one place becomes increasingly difficult. You can't grasp metal objects, and some plastics are melting too. Another problem is the sunlight. You can't do anything here without dark sunglasses. You'll simply go blind. And you need not just good dark sunglasses, but the type used by mountaineers climbing Everest. Your eyes need protection not only in the front, but also on the sides. Even sunlight reflected from the ground can literally burn out your eyes. When the temperature exceeds 50 degrees, each additional degree feels physically more and more severe. The difference between 32 and 33 degrees feels completely not the same as between 52 and 53. However, even with such heat, there are still plenty of life signs here. This is especially evident at night, as all sorts of insect creatures flock and crawl to the light. But many sources claim that there is no life on the Gandambarian Plateau itself, just like on Mars or Mercury. Well, we're about to find this out. It's getting harder and harder to keep going. It's not just the people who feel bad here. This is a region where even those who've been riding camels for years can barely survive. According to legends, by the end of journeys lasting weeks, even camels could barely walk, almost crawling on shaky legs. We finally reach the plateau of Gandambarian. We should remind you that the name of this place is very symbolic. Roasted wheat, translated from Persian. A truly Martian landscape opens up before us. Take a look at these two images. One of them is Mars. The other is the Gandambarian Plateau. Can you tell which one shows our planet and which one shows a completely different world? You will hardly be surprised by the fact you can warm up food in metal dishes dipped in sand here. That's what many travelers do. And that's not all. Once, for the sake of interest, a plastic container with a piece of raw meat was left here. 2 hours later, it was cooked to medium rare state. And if it had been left in the sun for another hour, it would have reached well done doneness. And that's just in the sun, not on the sand. But the Gandambarian Plateau is not small, and we still have the last 100 meters to go. The Martian landscape does not change. We see sand with a scatter of coal-black basalt flecks all around. It is their black color that caused the most extreme heat. It's simply life-threatening to stay here. Even if you are fortunate enough to be in good somatic health, you may get a nosebleed, not to mention feeling terrible in general. You might even start to shake. There have been such cases. This place literally sucks all the juices and vitality out of any living organism. But does it refer really to any organism? What about the belief that even bacteria can't live on the plateau? That's a myth, of course. The few people who manage to get here and stay alive have seen and even filmed insects quite vigorous. But more complex organisms have nothing to do here. It's a death trap you need to leave as quickly as possible. Better still, don't even approach it. The Lut Desert, a hellish furnace where even bacteria barely survive. But there is a place where things are totally different. Imagine that humanity has landed on a distant planet with thriving nature and even an amazing intelligent civilization. The incredible discoveries would probably last us for about 500 years. Well, actually, this actually happened. The very 500 years ago. Of course, that's a metaphor, alluding to Europeans first landing in South America. But the metaphors end there, and reality begins. A reality that is sometimes hard to believe. The Amazon rainforest spans 5.5 million square kilometers and is twice the size of the surface area of the dwarf planet Ceres. Even after centuries of exploration, its nature continues to astonish. Pink river dolphins alone deserve a special mention. New species of animals and plants are constantly being discovered here. It's almost as if we've landed on another planet. A garden of treasure. A living kaleidoscope of mysteries. Moreover, this dense wilderness bears traces of ancient civilizations that stretch the limits of our imagination. People from that very civilization still live in these forests today, but they avoid contact. It's as if they know something about us, something unsettling that we don't even know about ourselves. Somewhere in this region, conquerors looked for the mythical golden city of El Dorado. Maybe it does exist after all. Could the indigenous people be carefully hiding it, which is why they avoid contact? We are embarking on a journey through the Amazon rainforests to unravel these mysteries. Perhaps we'll even find out where the hell is El Dorado. What secrets lie within the expansive, uncharted depths of the Amazon rainforest? You're undoubtedly familiar with the Nazca Lines. They are truly remarkable, but there's something even more significant and perhaps even more mysterious in the Amazon. In 1980, in the state of Acre in western Brazil, people were engaged in their preferred activity that would soon pose a real threat to the planet: logging. However, the trees were primarily cut down not for timber, but to clear land for agriculture. Surprisingly, this situation presents a bitter irony linking us to the ancient civilizations that lived here thousands of years ago. As the story unfolds, you'll understand what this means. So, deforestation continued until the workers encountered a strange obstacle. Initially perceived as natural, its peculiar characteristics became apparent as the work progressed. At one point, people were stunned, realizing the bigger picture, as if solving a jigsaw puzzle. Jennifer Watling, an archaeologist from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, shared the details of these events and subsequent research in a series of interviews. At that time, she led the investigation of the unexpectedly uncovered phenomenon as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Exeter in the UK. Initially, the workers discovered strange trenches, remarkably straight, as though dug by an excavator, but done so many years ago, clearly long before impassable jungles and forests appeared and changed the landscape several generations ago. But there's more. As the deforestation continued, these trenches turned out to be part of larger, variously shaped figures, including geometrically precise ones, like circles, squares, rectangles, and even their combinations. There was no doubt that these were man-made. Such objects are called geoglyphs. Rapidly, similar figures were discovered throughout the region, quickly numbering into the hundreds. Currently, there have been found about 500 objects. But unlike the Nazca Lines, these newly discovered shapes were much more substantial. While the Nazca Desert's etchings were drawn with lines averaging 135 centimeters in width and 25 to 50 centimeters in depth, the Amazonian geoglyphs are considerably larger. In fact, they're so large, the word drawings doesn't seem fitting. The figure's lines consist of trenches 11 meters wide, up to 36 feet, 4 meters deep, and up to 13 feet. Along the trenches, embankments were formed from the same excavated soil, and they are quite different in scale, with the largest reaching up to 300 meters long, the equivalent of 3 stadiums. In the 1980s, scientists fairly quickly determined the age of these figures. They were dug at different times between the 1st and 15th centuries, meaning that the oldest objects were about 2,000 years old. Thanks to the trench's massive scale, these figures have survived multiple generations of changing forests. But what ancient civilization created them? And more importantly, why? Stay tuned for when we reveal the answer to this question. But first, we need to tell you something else. Geoglyphs helped to uncover the history of these forests, which turned out to be pretty unexpected and surprising. Jenny Watling and her team examined soil samples taken at different geoglyph sites at a depth of 5 feet, 1.5 meters. They were interested in the presence of stable carbon isotopes, whose content could reveal the dominant vegetation type from thousands of years ago. Additionally, they sought phytoliths, microscopic plant remains that often help scientists identify specific ancient species. The results were quite unexpected. Firstly, it turned out that bamboo has been growing quite abundantly here for 6,000 years. This suggests the ecosystem's resilience to climate change. This finding was somewhat puzzling, given that neighboring Bolivia transformed into a savanna around 6,000 years ago. Savanna is a large open space where large vegetation is scarce, and there are notably fewer trees. Of course, there are plenty of forests now, but it wasn't always like this. The second peculiarity involved palm trees, which thrived in this area for approximately 3,000 years. But why is this peculiar? The fact is that local species of palm trees coexist quite poorly with large, long-living trees. Palms grow fast, but over the years cannot withstand competition from trees that grow slowly but eventually overpower palms with their extensive root system and overshadowing canopy. All of this sounded nothing like the savanna that should have been here for millennia. Where does this discrepancy come from? The answer is simple. People came to this area about 4,000 years ago, but that's only half of the story. You might think that people deliberately cultivated trees here, because that's the first thing that comes to mind. In fact, this is where things get curiouser and curiouser. Wait till you hear the whole story. Jenny Watling's team found layers of charcoal in the soil, indicative of periodic large-scale fires. The people of that time probably struggled to survive such recurring calamities. Well, not really. After all, they instigated these fires intentionally. So ancient people didn't plant trees here, but in fact burned large areas of the forest on purpose? What nonsense! But why? Actually, doing so was much more rational than it seems. As we've mentioned earlier, palm trees struggle to coexist with larger trees over time, but they do grow rapidly. That's the whole secret. Ancient people needed palms as a source of food and building materials. In contrast, large trees were much less useful, and on the scale of several generations, they were seen as cumbersome weeds by prehistoric agronomists. This is how ancient people periodically reset tree populations, with forest fires being nothing more than agricultural technology. Trees and palms burned together, but they quickly recovered. In fact, palms were the first ones to regrow after such fires. This is the bitter irony we've mentioned earlier. Ancient people destroyed forests, as do we, but we do it on a truly threatening scale, and often prefer not to bother with restoring them. But let's move on. The current composition of the forests suggests that such a radical palm cultivation method hasn't been used here for hundreds of years. Indeed, the study of geoglyphs revealed that they've been abandoned for a long time. People left here about 650 years ago. Going back to geoglyphs, all the described studies have shown that these objects weren't created overnight. People had been living here for about 2,000 years before coming up with the idea to construct these strange objects. And with about 500 of them discovered so far, the number is truly astonishing. Watling found that people grew corn and squash near these earth structures, but archaeologists didn't find any evidence of villages or even permanent dwellings. However, there were signs that some rituals were performed in the area. Pottery fragments, remains of ornaments, and other characteristic artifacts were found at the site. Unfortunately, that's where our knowledge ends. For decades, scientists have strived to solve the mysteries of the Amazonian geoglyphs. Unfortunately, for the most part, the purpose of these objects and the meaning behind them remain a mystery. And there's no one to ask. Or is there? Indeed, if people have been living in this region for thousands of years, doing some large-scale farming, where the hell did they go? Paradoxically, the answer is quite simple and complex at the same time. Let's go into more detail. At the time Europeans first settled in what is now Brazil, approximately 4 million indigenous people lived there. This population has since decreased by about 8 times. The reasons are obvious. direct extermination during the Great Conquests, diseases, and assimilation. Most of Brazil's indigenous peoples now lead a somewhat exotic life, which is more or less similar to ours. However, the size of the country in general, and the Amazon forests in particular, turned out to be large enough for human communities to survive in the jungles of the Great River, managing to avoid contact with modern civilization until quite recently. Tribes of indigenous people have repeatedly relocated for various reasons. The Amazon rainforest is a vast world of its own. Thus, tribes may not frequently encounter each other. They no longer dig geoglyphs, but their lifestyle, if altered since ancient times, hasn't fundamentally changed. But the mere desire to avoid contact is not enough. Indigenous peoples would have faced extinction if civilized people, if I may say so, had not come to their senses in time. In Brazil, there exists a special organization called the National Indian Foundation, FUNAI. This is a federal government body that determines and executes state policy regarding the indigenous population in accordance with the Brazilian Constitution. In the 1960s and 1970s, upon discovering such tribes, the government attempted to enact an assimilation policy. However, this approach underwent a significant shift in 1987, when FUNAI established a separate department to create the so-called indigenous territories. These are essentially reservations where tribes that refuse contact live undisturbed and keep up their way of life. One of these territories was established in the Javari Valley, Vale do Javari, an area previously known only for several meteorite falls in 1930. You need to understand that this is more than just a valley. It's an expansive area, the size of South Carolina. The region is named after the Javari River, which has marked the border with Peru since 1851. It includes a large part of the municipality of Adelaide Norte, as well as adjacent lands in the western part of the Amazonas state. Besides the Javari, several other rivers also cross it. It's a quite favorable place to live, at least for indigenous peoples. This fragment of the Amazon rainforest was designated for the habitation of several uncontacted tribes, including Marubos, Matis, Kanamari, and others. The total population exceeds 6,000 people. The exact number is difficult to establish for obvious reasons. Interestingly, the presence of indigenous peoples in these areas was long doubted until a fortunate accident proved otherwise. FUNAI officials were searching for poachers in this area, which was already an official nature preserve. About 306 kilometers into the territory, the officials stumbled upon a previously unknown tribe. It turned out that these people had never had any contact with the outside world. The news was a sensation in scientific circles, as so-called uncontacted tribes are a rare phenomenon in the modern world. But as it turned out, it was just the beginning of incredible discoveries. It was later revealed that this tribe was far from the only one in the Vale do Javari. Despite the surge of scientific interest that rekindled in FUNAI after this find, scientists understood that research would have to be conducted with minimal contact with the tribes, ideally avoiding contact altogether. The issue is not limited to preserving the authenticity of these cultures. The problem lies in the real danger to the health and lives of these people. One of the main threats the outside world poses to indigenous people is diseases that could wipe them out. Their immune system is not adapted to most of the diseases that we tolerate easily or asymptomatically. This is why Brazilian authorities legislatively prohibit visiting the valley, except in some special cases. Scientists are thereby constrained to rely on aerial observations and compare data from previous years. Unfortunately, those in pursuit of quick profits rarely exhibit the same regard for the law as scientists. Illegal logging persists in these areas, along with aggressive farming and mining of natural resources. According to Fabrizio Amorim from FUNAI, this region holds the highest concentration of isolated groups in the Amazon and the world. As before, these groups remain perilously close to extinction in spite of the authorities' concerted efforts. Of course, indigenous peoples live not only in Valle do Javari. The vast Amazon basin serves as home to many other tribes. For example, we have quite a lot of data on the Himarima people, or Himarima. This is also a completely isolated tribe on the Amazon basin, living along the Piranhas River in Brazil. Reports about the Himarima include images of objects found in their living areas and stories from members of other tribes about random encounters with them. Their language belongs to the Arawan language family, spread in western Brazil and Peru. In 1943, the tribe's population was over 1,000 people, but no one knows how populous it is today. Although the Himarima have had rare contact with the outside world over the past 80 years, they continue to avoid any sustained interactions with outsiders. Interestingly, they display extreme hostility even towards other tribes. Who knows? Perhaps such aggression is driven by a survival instinct to avoid diseases to which the Himarima lack immunity. However, this is a weak argument, since other tribes are much friendlier. Furthermore, contacts do occur, sometimes in unexpected and tragic circumstances. For example, in October 2009, a plane with 11 people on board crash-landed in the middle of the Valle do Javari Valley. People from the Matis tribe found the crash site and reported the event to local authorities. They sent a rescue mission, which evacuated 9 survivors. They were lucky. If the plane had landed in the wilderness where the Himarima live, the fate of the survivors and the potential impact on locals would have been uncertain. The survivors could have been attacked by hostile aborigines, and the latter could have contracted diseases from the aliens. And then legends about demons on a flying dragon carrying a curse, that is, a disease, would be passed down from generation to generation. According to relatively recent data, the number of tribes avoiding contact with the outside world can reach 85 to 90. By this indicator, Brazil has surpassed Papua New Guinea, the former world leader in the number of isolated tribes. But let us remind you that they face a very real danger of extinction. Civilization continues to encroach, despite the imposed restrictions. The thirst for profit recognizes neither borders nor any cultural distinctiveness. The cruel irony is that these lands have already witnessed the horrific extermination of indigenous peoples during the so-called conquest of the New World. Then, the European conquerors were obsessed with gold, so much so that they were willing to take any risk or believe any legend as long as it mentioned this ill-fated metal. And of course, the most famous legend is that of El Dorado. The mysterious city where everything is made of gold, this king of metals and metal of kings. According to these stories, the city's wealth is so immense that its citizens embellish their houses with gold and even pave roads with it. Here, the inhabitants lack nothing and know no poverty. Many travelers and treasure hunters set out on expeditions to uncover the mystery of this enigmatic city, making great geographical discoveries in the process. They lost their illusions, money, health, and sometimes their lives in the jungles. As you probably know, the city, or even its ruins, have yet to be found. Why is the legend of El Dorado so resilient? Why has it managed to survive so many centuries? And why is it as popular as the legends of Shambhala, or even more so, Atlantis? It's not solely about gold and human avarice for wealth. Part of the secret lies in the fact that this legend is the most plausible one. Wait, what? Does El Dorado really exist? Let's take it one step at a time. The first rumors of El Dorado were spread by Spanish seafarers who were probably mistaken for gods by the indigenous people. They were brought to their land and hospitably treated to a feast with golden dishes. The locals regarded gold as a common metal, calling it the sweat of the sun. But the visitors were well aware of its worth back in their homelands. The natives' relaxed attitude towards gold was most likely misinterpreted. Although the indigenous people also valued gold for its jewelry properties, they didn't idolize it as the outlanders did. The foreigners concluded that the locals were indifferent to gold because they had it in abundance here, and they weren't entirely wrong. There's a theory that the Europeans witnessed a ritual that cemented their belief in the existence of cities entirely made of gold somewhere. We're talking about a ceremony performed by the Muisca Indians, who once inhabited the shores of Lake Guatavita. Situated on the periphery of the Amazon basin in present-day Colombia, this almost perfectly round lake is nestled in the crater of an extinct volcano, around 3,000 meters above sea level, with a depth of 125 meters. The Muisca's leader initiation ceremony involved some special actions. The future leader was anointed with coconut oil and generously sprinkled with gold dust. Hundreds of gold ornaments were loaded onto his raft. In the middle of the lake, he ceremoniously lowered all the treasures into the depths, left the raft, and swam slowly towards the shore. According to rumors that reached the Spaniards, this is what the leader initiation looked like in the Muisca tribe. In addition, the legend had tangible proof, not about the city, but about the ritual. The fact is that the leader initiation ceremony took place every year. You don't have to be a genius to assume the obvious. Over time, immeasurable golden treasures must have accumulated at the bottom of the lake. This is what the Spaniards thought, who in the 16th century embarked on the first expedition to the mysterious lake. Even though this expedition was purely exploratory, it had quite a good catch. Several dozen gold jewelry pieces were found on the muddy shores of the lake. Encouraged by their success, the Spaniards immediately set off to the shores of the lake again, this time better equipped. But there was no more gold on the shore. All that remained was the lake itself, or rather, its bottom. The conquistadors forced Native Americans to scoop out the lake. As ludicrous as it sounds, this is exactly what happened. Hundreds of locals passed buckets of water to each other in a human chain. The water was passed up the rocky shore, where it was dumped over the rocky cliff. This Sisyphean labor continued daily for 3 months. The level of the lake dropped by a measly few centimeters, yielding just a handful of gold ornaments. Realizing the effort was futile, the Spaniards called off this inhumane operation. The next treasure hunt took place 40 years later, in 1580. The wealthy Spanish merchant Antonio de Sepulveda attempted a more technologically competent and thorough approach to looking for gold at the bottom of the lake. With the help of the same indigenous people, some say there were 8,000 of them, he dug a deep trench in the mountainside to drain the water. And indeed, the water level dropped by as much as 3 meters. But there were very few gold pieces found on the exposed slopes, and it was still a long way to the bottom. 125 meters is no joke. In addition, the walls of the trench constantly collapsed. The pumping process slowed down, and the natives scampered in different directions. The merchant had to abandon his large-scale search, leaving Lake Guatavita unconquered once again. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the lake remained untouched, its tranquility undisturbed. Only the famous naturalist Alexander von Humboldt managed to calculate that if the legend is true, about 500,000 gold ornaments should be hidden at the lake's bottom. a treasure trove of astronomical value. These calculations inspired the English at the end of the 19th century, who made the last and most ambitious attempt to drain the lake a few years later. They even established a joint stock company, raising loan funds of 30,000 pounds sterling. In 1912, the expedition arrived at the shores of the lake, equipped with several powerful steam pumps. Once they were set up on the shore, the work began. After several weeks of pumping, the lake level dropped by 12 meters, exposing a considerable part of the bottom. But nature played a cruel joke on the English. Under the scorching South American sun, the muddy ground baked and hardened to the point where it was barely softer than cement. There was no technical capacity to dig into it. As for the findings, the lake once again teased the explorers, rewarding them with fewer than a dozen golden statues. The joint stock company went spectacularly bust. The level of the lake quickly rose, and everything went silent once again. The last time the lake made the news was in the 1960s, when a large golden statue was found on its shore, depicting a man on a raft surrounded by 12 idols. Of course, this immediately intrigued all the adventurers throughout the world. But the Colombian government, terrified of the impending massive influx of treasure hunters, promptly declared the lake a national reserve. Since then, the lake's peace remains undisturbed, except for the occasional enthusiasts in wetsuits with scuba gear. But they are quickly caught and heavily fined. Thus, the sacred lake of the Muisca stands majestic and untouched, staunchly guarding its treasures against human greed. So what about El Dorado? Where is this mysterious city after all? According to a rather convincing theory, the origin of the toponym El Dorado comes from legends about the very ritual of gold dust anointing. The Spaniards called the leader in such a transitional state El Hombre Dorado, which simply means golden man. Over time, legend by legend, the phrase transformed into El Dorado, that very lake where the chief's initiation ritual took place became the prototype of the mysterious golden city of El Dorado. So yes, it seems that El Dorado is indeed located right here. And in the deserts of North America, in Arizona, lies another mysterious place. This is a vast labyrinth of towering hills and steep gorges. For an entire century, scientists have been puzzling over how a single river could carve such a deep chasm. It's so enormous that one can see it from space. Being 445 kilometers long, 9 kilometers wide, and over 1.5 kilometers deep, this is the deepest gorge on Earth. The Colorado River has unveiled 2 billion years of our planet's history. It has been flowing here for 5 million years, eroding one geological layer after another. The first humans set foot here several thousand years ago. For Native Americans, this land is sacred. For centuries, they have revered the canyon as a place of immense power and spiritual significance. The more scientists explore this fascinating place, the more enigmatic it becomes. This is the Grand Canyon, and in this video, you'll find out how has an entire billion years of our planet's geological history got wiped away? Is there something wrong with the Colorado River, and could it dry up? How people planned to use the Grand Canyon's caves as fallout shelters? What incredible people have lived here for hundreds of years? And what unknown monster has been frightening them for generations on end? Today, we'll embark on a journey through the Grand Canyon and try to answer these questions ourselves. The Grand Canyon. For most laypeople, Earth's history is something straightforward, clear, and well known. But in reality, Earth hides many mysteries. How about an entire billion years that somehow vanished from our planet's history? But please don't think this is some sort of conspiracy theory. This mystery has a unique and quite epic name, the Great Unconformity. To this day, it remains a highly debated topic among scientists. In a nutshell, we have a pretty good idea about Earth's conditions 550 million years ago based on geological research. We also know what the planet was like 1.5 billion years ago. However, the billion-year gap in between remains a mystery. Why did this happen? Let's start with a brief primer. Studying our planet's past is like digging into a layered cake. The further back we want to look into the past, the deeper into the ground we need to dig. Or we could go to places that already have natural geological faults, which arguably makes the Grand Canyon an ideal research site. Earth's geological history is wide open in the canyon. Here's a layer from one epoch. There's another. You can take samples from any epoch using simple equipment. And that's what scientists do. For example, they unearthed Elves Chasm Genesis stone in the canyon, which is 1.84 billion years old. Given that the Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old, it turns out that you can study 40% of its history in the Grand Canyon alone. This is huge because rocks can tell us almost everything. They encapsulate insights about the atmosphere, water, and living creatures that have been sealed for billions of years. All you need to know is how to extract and interpret this information from the stones. Fortunately, geologists know how to do this today, but their work often remains undeservedly overlooked. Just consider for a moment that some of the most crucial specialists studying Mars are not rocket engineers. They are geologists who can accurately identify, for example, when and where Mars had water using only rock patterns and satellite analysis. Imagine the research potential they have on Earth, where there are tons of rocks that can be physically examined. One such enthusiastic geologist was John Wesley Powell. In 1869, he embarked on an expedition to the Grand Canyon to touch the planet's history by deeply exploring stone strata. The canyon captivated Powell so much that he named it the Library of the Gods, in recognition of the knowledge this gigantic formation provides. However, there was an issue with Powell's initial calculations. While camped at a cliffside, he calculated that given the age of the Earth and the oldest rock at the bottom, the cliff should stand 3 kilometers tall. But in reality, it was only 1.5. What was wrong? Could there be an error in his calculations? Well, no. The calculations were correct. But what turned out to be wrong were the sedimentary rocks themselves that were simply missing, although they should have been there. Powell named the problem the Great Unconformity. Unconformity because the older rocks were lying at the bottom and much younger ones on top with nothing in between. And the great because the middle was missing rocks representing almost a third of Earth's history. Where did they go? In the century and a half since Powell's time, our understanding has evolved, and we now have more precise data. The oldest rock samples John examined were indeed almost 2 billion years old. The younger ones were roughly 500 to 550 million years old. But they lay on top of one another, with nothing in between. There are no intermediary layers in the Grand Canyon. Scientists can't simply seem to find an intermediate layer that is 1 billion years old, or say 900 million years old. They are only super old, followed by super young layers. Similar unconformities have been discovered in the canyon, where rock strata representing 175, 500 and even 725 million years were missing. But unconformities don't end here. Another scientist, James Hutton, had observed a similar phenomenon a century prior to Powell at Sakar Point in Scotland. However, he established the period and the scale of the problem differently. The same pattern as in the Grand Canyon was observed at Frenchman Mountain, east of Las Vegas. There, rocks aged 1.7 billion years rest peacefully with stones that are 520 million years old. Similarly, the middle layer is missing. Tourists can even go on a special route to look at the very place where a quarter of the Earth's history has simply vanished. Stephen Marshak, a professor at the University of Illinois, states that such unconformities are found everywhere on Earth. The Grand Canyon just happens to be a unique place where the fault literally presented this mystery to astonished scientists right before their eyes. For example, one would need to drill several kilometers deep to reach layers of comparable age in Europe. But Stephen is 100% sure that if we were to drill so deep anywhere in the world, we would encounter exactly the same thing. Rocks with an age difference of over 1 billion years lying on top of each other. According to the geologist, this is a global issue that warrants more attention due to its potential existential implications. However, it's not as though scientists completely forgot about this mystery. There are quite robust hypotheses explaining the causes of this planetary scale oddity. They are linked to global glaciation, continental movement, and even the temporary disappearance of the Earth's magnetic field. But so far, none of the hypotheses has gained enough weight to be deemed definitive. The mystery remains a mystery. And this is just the beginning of our journey into the fascinating world of the Grand Canyon. Our exploration of the Grand Canyon would be incomplete without a closer look at the Colorado River, a remarkable natural feature that partially formed the canyon. However, this unique river is now under real threat. But let's take it one step at a time. The name Colorado originates from the Spanish word colorado. As one might easily guess, the word used to mean colored, but this usage is deemed outdated today. The term now primarily refers to vibrant red color. This is all due to the red sandstone silt that covered the river basin, causing the river to have a reddish hue throughout its history. This changed in 1963 with the construction of the Glen Canyon Dam, which blocked the red silt, altering the river's appearance. The river is 2,330 kilometers long and is on average about 90 meters wide. The narrowest part of the river lies 217 kilometers from the mouth, where it's just 23 meters wide. The river runs through 7 states: Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, California, and Nevada. Its journey begins in the Rocky Mountains, with its source situated at an altitude exceeding 2,700 meters. From there, it flows southwest to Lake Mead and then into Mexico. The depth of the river varies greatly, ranging from 2 to 30 meters. Its winding course, flow characteristics, and incredibly beautiful cliffs attract a lot of rafting enthusiasts and other thrill seekers. The river is home to 3 species of endangered fish: the humpback chub, the bony-tailed chub, and the razorback sucker. They are under strict state protection, and conservation efforts are underway to restore the populations and save them from extinction. The Colorado River also sustains vast natural areas. 11 national parks are located along the river's banks. Despite the seemingly desert terrain, there's plenty of wildlife: mule deer, moose, bighorn sheep, lynx, cougars, coyotes, and beavers. Numerous bird species also thrive along its length. Moreover, the river is a critical lifeline for humans. It supplies water to over 30 million people and irrigates over 4 million acres of land. The Colorado River Aqueduct, also known as the Los Angeles Aqueduct, was constructed in 1941 and spans an impressive 419 kilometers, 260 miles. The aqueduct has nearly 90 tunnels and delivers more than 3.79 billion liters of water to people per day. The waters of Colorado make up 25% of the total amount of water flowing out of the U.S. and into the ocean, offering substantial hydroelectric potential. The U.S. has capitalized on this power source quite epically through the iconic Hoover Dam, built right here in 1935. Standing 221 meters high, this gigantic structure is aptly compared to such wonders of the world as the Egyptian pyramids. However, this seemingly eternal river is now under real threat. The Colorado River is replenished by precipitation and snow in the mountains, but recently there has been almost no rainfall in its basin, and the mountain snow caps have diminished due to global warming. As we've all heard many times, climatologists say this is attributed to our excessive burning of fossil fuels. A record-breaking drought has persisted in the region for 23 years, the longest in over 1,000 years. Consequently, the majestic river, supplying tens of millions of people and vast agricultural lands, has significantly shallowed. And the trend is only getting worse. The river fills Lakes Meade and Powell, the country's largest reservoirs, which are only a quarter full. If their water level drops even lower, they won't be able to power electricity stations and provide clean water for 40 million Americans. All of this has prompted the U.S. government to enforce a strict water conservation regime in Arizona and Nevada. But the problem of global warming is indeed global. The pressing question, what should we do, sounds increasingly ominous with each passing year. From the waters of the Colorado River, let's return to the cliffs of the Grand Canyon and another amazing wonder created here by Mother Nature. A hidden and truly fascinating world lies deep beneath the rugged terrain. This is the caverns of the Grand Canyon. These astonishing subterranean formations not only preserve evidence of the planet's geological history, but also hold astonishing prehistoric artifacts and even echoes of significant historical events from relatively recent years. This geological marvel was created over millions of years. Water erosion wore down limestone formations, resulting in a vast labyrinth about 70 meters deep. The confirmed length of the cave network is about 100 kilometers, but its actual length remains a mystery. It's one of the largest dry cave systems in the world, and by some estimates, the largest. Nearly constant temperature of 14 degrees Celsius or 56 degrees Fahrenheit, and the low humidity of about 2% makes the caverns an optimal environment for ecosystem preservation. The discovery of this amazing place is associated with an intriguing story. The caves were accidentally discovered in 1927 by a young woodcutter named Walter Peck. While heading out to play poker with friends, he accidentally fell into a cavity. This must be a gold mine, he thought. The next day, Walter decided to explore the cave a little and discovered shiny yellow veins in the rock. Surely it must be gold. Believing it was gold, he promptly purchased the land in hopes of becoming rich overnight, but got greatly disappointed. When the test results came back, it turned out to be nothing more than fool's gold, or pyrite with iron oxide. Walter spent all his money on buying the land and was left with nothing. Therefore, he opened the caverns to tourists to make ends meet. At first, the entrance was at the place of Walter's initial discovery, where narrow wooden stairs were built to the bottom of the cavern. In 1962, an elevator was installed on the other side of the cave, which delivered tourists to a depth of 70 meters in under a minute. The old entrance was bricked up. Once, something astonishing was discovered here: the skeleton of a rare species of an extinct animal, a gigantic sloth. This creature was immense, measuring 4 to 5 meters in length and weighing over a ton. Indeed, this was a fearsome creature. It turned out to be a female. Apparently, the poor sloth fell into the cavern just like Walter and couldn't get out. The skeleton was handed over to scientists, and a taxidermy replica was placed at the site of discovery. In the explored part of the cavern, a large grotto has been repurposed into a quaint restaurant, a venue for wedding ceremonies, and even a luxury suite for two. Since the cave has almost constant temperature and humidity all year round, this natural climate control contributed to a very interesting event. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the U.S. government designated such caves as natural bunkers in case of nuclear war and the destruction of official shelters. These caverns served as one of such natural bunkers. They were designed to accommodate 2,000 people who could stay here for several months. It's amazing that the food that was brought into the caves almost 60 years ago is still reportedly preserved, presumably due to the aforementioned climatic conditions. Therefore, no one has removed the strategic reserve from here yet, and the caverns seem to remain on standby for strategic use. Marveling at the beauty of the Grand Canyon, one should not forget that these places have served as a home for people for hundreds of years, the indigenous peoples of North America. The Havasupai people are a Native American tribe whose ancestral lands are located right here in the southwestern region of the U.S. They lived for centuries in a remote and stunningly beautiful side branch of the Grand Canyon. The Havasupai have a rich history deeply intertwined with the Grand Canyon region. Their indigenous presence in this area dates back over 800 years, and evidence of their settlements can be found throughout the canyon. Traditionally, the Havasupai were a semi-nomadic tribe, moving between the canyon floor and the plateaus above to fully utilize the diverse resources available to them. One of the remarkable features of the modern Havasupai tribe is their location. This is one of the most remote and inaccessible Native American reservations in the United States, reachable only on foot, by horse, or helicopter. Although such isolation stems from the tragic history of indigenous oppression, it has also allowed the tribe to preserve its unique culture and traditions. The capital of the Havasupai Reservation is the town of Supai, and it is still home to about 400 members of the tribe. The Havasupai people have a deep spiritual connection to their ancestral lands. The name Havasubaaja translates as people of the blue-green waters, reflecting the stunning turquoise waterfalls and streams that flow through the canyon. These natural wonders, such as the breathtaking Havasu and Mooney Falls, form an integral part of the cultural and religious practice of the Havasupai. The Havasupai tribe has long been recognized as the guardians of the Grand Canyon. Their knowledge of the land, plants, and wildlife is invaluable to researchers and conservationists working in this region. The tribe actively takes part in environmental efforts, striving to protect their ancestors' lands and maintain the delicate balance of the canyon's ecosystem. These efforts are crucial to ensure that humanity does not lose this amazing piece of original culture. In fact, many similar cultures are already irreversibly lost, with only their remnants left behind. At least it's fortunate that these relics are carefully protected. We are also about to explore one such location. On a stretch of Desert View Drive on Arizona Highway 64, 5 kilometers west of Desert View Tower, there's a remarkable place. A sort of time capsule that captures the daily life of the ancient Pueblo, a group of indigenous people from the southwest U.S. It was found about 800 years ago. The National Park Service, NPS, recognizes this place as one of Arizona's most important archaeological sites. The section consists of a small U-shaped pueblo with a living area, storage rooms, and a kiva. A kiva is a special room used by this people for rituals and gatherings, many of which are associated with the unique Kachina belief system. Members of the Gila Pueblo Archaeological Organization from Globe, Arizona, first excavated the site in 1930. Conservation work was performed in 1948 and 1965. In 1974, the site was included in the National Register. And now it's a popular tourist attraction in the Grand Canyon area. When arriving here, tourists often experience some profound emotions. Picture yourself standing amidst the vast expanse of the Arizona desert, surrounded by the remnants of a primitive, yet unique and in its own way fascinating civilization. Imagine walking in the footsteps of the Pueblo ancestors who inhabited this region over 800 years ago. The Tusayan ruins would easily take you to a bygone era when these ancestors called this arid landscape their home. Although much remains unknown about the daily life of the Pueblo ancestors, the Tusayan ruins offer many clues. Archaeologists have found pottery shards, tools, and even remnants of ancient hearths, shedding light on their cultural customs and lifestyle. The Tusayan ruins also testify to the ancient Pueblo being in harmony with nature. They built their homes in alcoves and caves, using natural rock formations as the foundation for their dwellings. This unity with the environment shows their remarkable ability to live harmoniously with the harsh beauty of the Southwest. These archaeological wonders hold a rich tapestry of stories and mysteries, serving as a fascinating portal to the past. Therefore, a visit to the Tusayan ruins should be high on your must-see list. The experience of stepping back in time would give you a new appreciation for the complex mosaic of human history. There are even more astounding phenomena in the Grand Canyon that go beyond the realm of science, but we simply can't ignore them. After all, the Loch Ness Monster was also taken quite seriously for some time. So, a mysterious creature has long been rumored to live deep within the primordial wilderness of the southwest U.S., where the landscape itself is intertwined with legends. For centuries on end, it has been terrifying locals, and of course, piqued the interest of modern cryptozoologists. The enigmatic Mogollon Monster. Legend has it that the Mogollon Monster, named after the Mogollon Rim area in Arizona, is a tall, bipedal, ape-like creature up to 8 feet tall, covered in shaggy fur ranging from dark brown to reddish hues. Eyewitnesses describe its glowing eyes, piercing the night with an eerie luminescence. Well, by eyewitnesses we mean those who claim to have seen the creature. Indeed, tales of the Mogollon Monster have been passed down for many generations. They originate in the folklore of Native Americans. Tribes such as the Apache and Navajo told stories of a powerful, elusive creature that roams the deep forests and canyons, blending seamlessly into the environment, being a true master of stealth. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence suggesting the Mogollon Monster exists is the discovery of huge footprints resembling the tracks of a massive primate. Cryptozoologists scrupulously studied and measured these tracks, finding astounding footprints of up to 60 centimeters long. These impressive tracks left many people in awe and sparked debates about the true nature of the monster. Fortunately or unfortunately, the scientific community is somewhat skeptical about the authenticity of these prints. there is a large number of eyewitnesses who didn't see the monster, but claim to have heard it. Those who have been fortunate enough to hear it report chilling cries at night, something between a human scream and the cry of a wild animal. Of course, the existence of the monster is fittingly shrouded in a haze of legends and conjectures, backed up by no real evidence. Otherwise, it would have been a global sensation. But whether it is a figment of imagination or indeed an undiscovered creature, the Muggione monster has already become a landmark of these places, and it rightfully earned its place in the pantheon of cryptozoology, alongside the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, and other similar characters. But you, dear viewers, if you find yourself in the wild places of the Southwest, keep your eyes and ears wide open. Who knows? Maybe you'll be lucky enough to personally verify that these legends are true. Though perhaps it would be better if you didn't. As we say goodbye to the captivating realm of the Grand Canyon, we conclude our expedition into the heart of the mysterious Southwest. It will always remind us that the world still holds wonderful secrets, and these secrets will sooner or later be unearthed by curious daredevils who will finally find answers to all the questions.